It's a good day to brew, baby. What is up, YouTube? It's your boy Millsy, back with Hometown Commander, back for another episode of Millsy Brews, the show where I brew version 1.0 deck list of the Commander in front of us on my quest to brew the magic world. As always, that deck list is going to be down in the description for you below, as well as I'd really appreciate it if you could interact with the video, like, comment, subscribe, consider checking out the links down in the description. I'd really appreciate that. Today, we are starting Marvel Week, as the Secret Lair Marvel Super Drop is coming out as of this Monday, as you see this video. So why not cover all of them? We're going to go through all 5 of them this week and have a grand old time celebrating everybody's love for Marvel. And today, we're covering Black Panther, Wakandan King, a Selesnya 2/2 human noble hero with first strike that says whenever Black Panther or another creature comes into our control, we're going to put a counter on a target land we control. And then for 3 mana, we can move all +1/+1 counters from a target land we control onto a target creature. And if we move 1 or more counters this way, we gain that much life and we draw a card. I think there's a lot of things on Black Panther that we could focus on. There's a lot of ways to take this, right? Creatures coming in, counters, life gain. You can kind of run the gambit of those 3. And I think the really good thing about Black Panther is we're in the perfect colors to pay off all 3 of those. We've got lots of green-white tokens synergies for making a lot of creatures come in to get a lot of counters in our lands. We're going to do that in this deck. We're in probably 2 of the more perfect colors to deal with counters. I think the only other color that we'd love to have for that would be blue, but that's okay. There's a lot of options in counters, and we're going to talk about that. And then we're in great colors for our creatures being big and be able to do combat. So that's kind of the goal of the deck. Talk about how we're going to get a bunch of creatures in to get as many Black Panthers triggers as we can, care about the counters and moving them. And then we're going to talk about a few lands that we actually don't mind keeping the counters on them because we can animate them, turn them into creatures, and allow them to attack. And I think that's an important thing to talk about as well. I think if you know me well enough, you know I'm never going to turn down the chance to take my shot at a token deck because I think tokens are some of the easiest ways to get creatures in. And I think this deck does a really good job at paying them off 1 for 1, right? I think the really nice thing about tokens in this deck is that let's say I get 10 tokens in and someone wipes the board. I still have those tokens sitting on my lands that can still be reanimated on their own, potentially, and still become creatures on their own, or Black Panther can come right back out. We can use his ability to move those counters, and the counters are still waiting there. We may not have the tokens, but the point is that the value, I think, is still there. And I think that's what makes the tokens so good in this deck. So we're trying to make as many tokens as we can, I think, in reality, for as cheaply and efficiently as we can. But a Planeswalker that I haven't normally played in tokens decks in the past that I think feels really good here is Basri Ket. So the +1 puts a counter on a creature and gets indestructible on a turn. The -2 says whenever 1 or more non-token creatures attack this turn, we make that many soldier tokens that are tapped and attacking. This is nice because we're going to get those counters as soon as they come in with Black Panther out. And the -6 is the beginning of your combat in your turn. You make a soldier and then put a counter on each creature you control, spreading those counters out, right, and really taking advantage of it. What I like about Basri is there are going to be turns where we want to just use that counter, get the counter on something and give it indestructible, but there are definitely going to be turns where we want to make those soldiers and spread more counters around. We have classic token generators like Elspeth and Adeline that do their job making tokens each turn. Elspeth can just make those straight 3 soldiers a turn. The -3 is great as a one-sided board wipe. If a lot of our creatures have less than 4 power, this is going to feel really great. And then if you get up to that -7, give them that nice emblem to buff our entire board. Adeline is an absolute value engine, making 3 humans on average whenever you attack an opponent. You're going to create a human attacking each opponent. That's 3 triggers, right? A Black Panther, and then you're going to have more counters to get on your lands. And I think that's really important when we talk about the counters. We'll talk about it again at the end when we talk about the lands that we can animate. But you have to remember that if you can go into this deck with the perspective that you're not just putting counters on your lands just to move them, if the backup is always putting them on a land that can animate itself, then I think there's this dual threat that we have to think of in the back of our heads instead of just saying, oh, I'm just going to move them to my other creatures. Moving them to other creatures is great because we get to gain life and draw cards, but there's that in the background. Jackrabbit can make rabbits on attack, which is really nice. It's not a bad place to put your counter since it makes rabbits equal to its power, right? So you can get more of them that way. Pest Infestation is a token spell I've always enjoyed, allowing you to destroy artifacts and enchantments your opponent control and then make some pests in the process. Grand Crescendo can give all your creatures indestructible, but gives you that option to bring some tokens in on the back end. March of the Multitudes lets you make a bunch of soldiers with lifelink, and you get to convoke, so all your other creatures can help you do that. Secure the Waste came in the secret layer, and it's a great token generated in its own right. Just X and a white to make X/1/1 warriors is great, especially when you can do it at instant speed on somebody else's turn to get them in, get those counters around, and that way you have all your mana up on your turn to move the counters if you want to do that. I love Ezekiel's Chariot. It's a house of value once you get a board of tokens set up. It comes in with 2/2/2 cats, so that's enough to crew it. And then once it attacks, when it's crewed, you just make a token that's copying another token you control. So we're not playing a ton of ways to manipulate tokens in this deck, meaning like copy something and turn it into a token. But I think the good thing about Chariot is you should ideally be getting at least one token a turn, and Chariot's a 4/4 that you can put counters on with Black Panther's ability. You can make even harder to deal with, especially once we add things like Trample into the mix. Horn of Valhalla can make X/1/1 soldiers on its adventure side, and then on its regular side, the equipped creature just gets +1/+1 for each creature you control. This could be great on something that has trample or flying, any sort of evasion. It just means more damage. Scepter of Celebration feels great too, giving a creature +2/+0 and then trample. And then whenever the equipped creature deals combat damage to a player, you get to make that many citizens. So it's more counters, more things that we're giving on to our lands and can eventually spread. What I like about the Scepter is that you can move it around, right? So it doesn't have to always be on one creature. I think it feels good on something like Black Panther, right? Because it has first strike, but it could be good anywhere. A card that I've loved for Mixalon and I think works really well in this deck, especially once we get it over to the backside, is Thousand Moon Smithy. It says when it enters, you make a gnome soldier artifact creature token with its power and toughness equal to the number of artifacts and or creatures you control. So that gnome is going to scale over the course of the game. But then at the pre-combat main phase, you can tap 5 untapped artifacts or creatures, and if you do, you flip it over. It flips over into a land. It says if you tap that mana and you use it for an artifact or a creature, I believe, you get to make another one of these gnomes. So you can start making these gnomes and making them bigger and bigger and becoming threats your opponents have to deal with. We got that reprint of Primal Vigor in the secret there, which is great. It's a great one, especially for a deck like this. The only downside to Primal Vigor is doubling season, for example, says that only the things you do are doubled. Primal Vigor says whenever a token would be created, twice that many are instead. So you do, unfortunately, open up some of the options to your opponents to use Primal Vigor as well. But I think the hope, no matter what, with this doubler, is that we play it when we're already in a position that we're ahead and we can take advantage of it before our opponents can. Dollmaker's Shop and Porcelain Gallery just feels great. On the Dollmaker's Shop side, remember, one or more non-toy creatures attack a player. We control attack a player, we get a 1/1 toy. And then once we turn on Porcelain Gallery, all of our creatures turn into big XXs, where X is the number of creatures we control, probably going pretty far to end a game once we just start swarming the board with more creatures. This is really nice if we turn our lands into creatures, because then they get to be that base toughness plus the counters that are on them, and you can start to see where that could get hairy once we talk about what lands there are. One of my favorite token generators, especially when we're dealing with attacking, is Rabble Rousing. This is an enchantment that says whenever one or more creatures attack, doesn't matter non-token or token, just any of them at all, you make a citizen for each of that creatures attacking. This is really nice because then we're refilling our board, and if those creatures need to die in combat, let's say we have 4 or 5 1/1s that we need to attack for the purpose of other abilities, when we know we're going to lose them, well, Rebel Rousing just gets to replace them, and then we don't really mind if they get killed in combat because we already got the replacement. And then if we were to hit 10 or more creatures, we can play the card that we hit away with Rabble Rousing, which is a nice way to get a free card for something we already want to be doing anyway. Getting into making our tokens matter, because I think it's easy to make the tokens, and Black Panther pays them off. So it's not like that just making the tokens, it doesn't matter, but we want to do something more with them. And I think the easiest way in these two colors to think about it is something like Jaheira or Enduring Vitality. Giving them the ability to tap for mana is huge, and allowing them to continue, making our turns go longer, more mana, more spells, getting more down on board. Or my thought process is animating more of our lands if we can see multiple of them at once. Best is a card that I've always enjoyed that I think feels good here. Whenever one or more creatures with base power and toughness 1/1 come in, you put a counter on it. So one or more gets 1 counter. And then whenever Best attacks, each other creature with base power and toughness 1/1 gets +X on the turn, where X is the number of counters on her. This is a good way to just buff your entire board if we're making a lot of 1/1s. The nice part is if the 1/1s get made on separate triggers, that just means more counters on Best and more potential upside, for them when we get into combat. King Darien gives all other creatures +1/+1 and can sacrifice itself to protect all of our tokens, giving them hexproof and indestructible. This is a great thing to protect against a board wipe. Yes, it'll take out our regular creatures, but there's probably a lot of board states where we have enough tokens, it's worth protecting the tokens to make sure that we can still keep board presence, especially if someone's thought is, I'm going to wipe the board to just take out your entire board. Now we might be protecting 60 or 70% of it. Queen Alanal is a card I've always enjoyed. It's a star where stars the number of creatures you control. But if you would make one or more tokens, you make an extra soldier instead. And that's really nice because now we're getting more creatures to come in for Black Panther's ability, spreading out more of those countered. Rosy Cotton is one that's going to allow us to not just put counters on our lands, but also put counters on our creatures. It says whenever you create a token, you put a counter on target creature other than a Rosy. This is really nice because then we can start growing our board as we're putting land counters on our lands, right? And so now we can just stretch out the value we're getting from every creature coming in and every creature becoming more worth it. Tristani feels great here, gaining life equal to a creature's toughness whenever a creature enters the battlefield under our control. So the more tokens we make, the more life we're gaining off those creatures coming in. Caretaker's Talent can draw us a card once per turn whenever a counter comes in. Note that it's only once each turn, so if we manage to make a token on our opponent's turns, we can actually get a draw off that. The level 2 can copy a token, or that level 3 can give a buff, but it's really nice to get that card draw every turn as we're doing what we want to do anyway. And then for the common good, felt like a card that seems interesting here, right? You make X tokens that are a copy of a target token you control. All tokens get indestructible to your next turn. So kind of a little bit of protection right around the board if our opponents are trying to board wipe us with destruction board wipes, and then you gain a life for each of them. It kind of feels like everything that we're trying to do, make some more tokens, give us maybe a chance to take a nice attack, gain some life. And I think we can kind of take real advantage of maybe trying to pick a token we really like and making more copies of it. When we start talking about other ways to take advantage of having a lot of tokens of the same type, whether it be board buffs or things like that, that can come into more handy. But I think what the other way to look at this is how the counters can matter. Because at the end of the day, I think Black Panther is going to be giving us a lot of counters. And it's okay to let the counters sit on the lands. But then we want to move them to our creatures. We want to grow our creatures and make them tough to deal with. And so we have things like Absent Battle Priest and Absent Falconer that would give all of our creatures with a counter on it an ability. Battle Priest gives them lifelink. Falconer gives them flying. These are abilities that are going to become great, even though lifelink isn't as evasive as something like flying is. I think lifelink is still important. If we have a 12/12 attacking our opponent and they feel like they need to chump it with a 1/1, we're still gaining 12 life, and we're still getting real value out of that combat. Champion of Lambholt says, well, whenever another creature comes in, it's going to put a counter on itself. And then if your opponent's creatures have power less than Champion of Lambholt, they just can't block us at all. This is a way to turn a big board or putting a lot of creatures in play after Champion comes down into a big advantage in combat as we push our board in for damage. Devoted Druid says that we can put a -1/-1 counter on it to untap it, and it taps for a green. The way this interaction works is if a creature were to have a +1/+1 and a -1/-1 counter on themselves at the same time, those actually cancel out, meaning the Devoted Druid can effectively untap as many times as it has +1/+1 counters it or more, right? We can always put a -1/-1 counter on it when it doesn't have one. As long as we don't put enough equal to its toughness, we'll be okay. But here's a way to potentially get multiple green a turn, and we can use Black Panther's ability just to move those counters to Devoted Druid so we can always be getting more mana that way, right? Dustshell Crawler giving all of our creatures with a +1/+1 counter on it trample, and then Envoy the Ancestors from Outer Horizons 3 giving all modified creatures we control lifelink. So very similar to that Battle Priest. So you can see we don't want counters to just matter for the purposes of creatures being big and getting into combat. We also can give them extra abilities, which I think is important. Tuskguard Captain giving combat trampled everything with +1/+1 on it. Top tier, we love that. Also has the ability to put a counter on itself, just like the two Absent ones with its own Outlast ability. Innkeeper's Talent, probably one of the pricier cards on the deck, but I think it's worth it. You get a counter every turn, no matter what, at start of combat. If we go up to level 2, everything with a counter on it has Ward 1. That's a way to stop your opponents, right? You have to have them pay just a teeny bit more to target your things. And then if we get up to level 3, we get the bottom half of that Primal Vigor ability, but only for us. If we would put counters on a permanent player, we get twice that many instead. That means 2 counters per creature, and you can see how that's going to start to rack up. And then Stocking the Pantry just feels like a great card. For 1 mana, whenever you put one or more counters on a creature, we put a counter on Stocking the Pantry. We can pay 2 and remove a counter from Stocking the Pantry to draw a card. So if we've got spare mana, we need to refill our hand. or we're not sure what to do, we can do this at instant speed. We can leave up mana. Maybe we want to do something our opponent's turn, and then if they don't do anything, pay that mana, remove the counter, draw a card to refill our hand. The thing I see this being the most useful for, or a good combo with, is something like Devoted Druid, right? If we have a ton of, we want to have a ton of, if we have a ton of creatures come in, got a bunch of spare counters, put them on Devoted Druid, we could, tap Devoted Druid to draw some cards and kind of refill our hand, keep our game plan going. And I think that's important. As far as getting stuck in go, I think this is one good thing that Selesnya is very good at. We can do this in a lot of ways. Beastmaster Ascension, when we attack with a creature, we put a counter on it. Once it gets to 7 or more counters, all of our creatures get +5/+5, turning all of our 1/1 tokens into 6/6s, becoming a whole lot harder to deal with. Felidar Retreat can either make us tokens, or it can put a counter on each of our creatures and give them vigilance whenever a land comes in. This is a great way to start a good turn for combat, because you can attack effectively for free, right? They're still up to block, but just them growing that little bit more is going to potentially help our tokens survive in combat. The difference between a 3/3 and a 2/2 could be a lot if all your opponents has are 1/1s, right? Even if our opponent has 20 1/1s, if I have 8 2/2s and I turn them into 3/3s, now my opponents have to block differently. If they want to trade, then they have to block differently. Flowering of the White Tree is one of my favorite buff enchantments because it's really well worth it for the 2 mana. All non-legendary creatures get +1/+1. All legendary creatures get +2/+1 in Ward 1. So another way to just a little bit protect our things, make our opponents have to pay more. You'd be very surprised how many times in a game of Commander that a ward cost alone can shut a player's turn down because they want to remove something, but they have to pay extra mana to do it, and it can throw them off playing more than one spell per turn, and that's a lot. At the end of the day, Commander is a tempo game, and if you're not on tempo, what your deck's trying to do, it can push you behind your opponent. Scarab's Uprising, giving all of our creatures trample, is really what it's the best for. I mean, as we're putting all these counters on creatures, that's really great, giving it trample and knowing that our opponents can't just free chump it without taking damage. That's going to become an important thing. Inspiring Leader, as long as Black Panther's out, all of our creatures are going to get +2. All our creature tokens are going to get +2/+2. Top tier ability. It's great when Black Panther's out. When he's not out, it is kind of a dead card, but I think that's okay, because I think a lot of the times Black Panther wants to be out anyway, and him being 2 mana means that 2, 4, 6 mana is going to be well worth it for his ability and easy to bring back down. And then Virtual Loyalty, being our end step, we put a counter on each creature and we control and untap them. A great way to give everybody effectively vigilance, but spread counters around. Make sure that all our other abilities that care about counters are getting cared about as we're going over the course of the game. And then, well, lands can attack. There are lands that can turn themselves into creatures. And I think this is really important to think about, because we don't just want to always move the counters. I think having a land that can turn itself into a creature, especially one that has flying, like a couple of the ones that we'll talk about, is a great outlet, because then we now are turning that land that might have 8 or 10 counters into a creature, and our opponents are not going to know what to do. I think the best example of that is Inkmoth, that's over there on the right. This is a $20 land, so it's not cheap. But for a mana, you could turn into a 1/1 creature with flying and infect until end of turn. Remember, all you need to do is deal 10 damage with an infect creature to an opponent to knock them out of the game. So Inkmoth Nexus can be a risk to your opponents. It comes into a creature with flying, right? So if your opponents don't have flyers, now it's a threat. And now they have to worry about, what if you get too many counters on your Inkmoth Nexus? What do I do? Do I wait till it's a creature to get rid of it? Now your opponents have to play around it. Cave of the Frost Dragon just turns into a 3/4 for 5 mana, which may seem like a lot, and it is a lot. But if I have 20 counters on it, or 15 counters on it, I don't mind paying the 5 mana to get an 18 or a 20 power dragon that can attack a player with flying, right? It's important to remember that it has flying. Same thing with Blinkmoth Nexus over there on the left, just turning into a 1/1 with flying. Doesn't have the infect like Inkmoth, but I think that's okay, because again, at the end of the day, it's in the air. If your opponents do not have many creatures in the air, now they have a real problem deciding how to deal with these. Because now these become a looming threat, right? You have them on the battlefield, and your opponent has to decide, do I take out something else, or do I wait till you turn that land into a creature, and where do I use my removal? And remember, because they're lands, unless we turn them into a creature, they get to survive a lot of those board wipes, because they're not going to be, hopefully, creatures when our opponents use those board wipes. Lair of the Hydra I really like, because for just 1 green, it becomes a 0/0 creature that, if hopefully we have lands on it so it doesn't immediately die, right? But the point is, just for a single green, we could turn into a creature. So a very small cost, right? Turn into a creature. Mishra's Factory, 1 mana turn into a 2/2 Treetop Village, 2 mana turn into a 3/3 with Trample, and I think that's huge as well. So, right, more counters on Treetop it now turns into that with a trample. I think it's important to have that conversation about those lands because I think it's going to be really easy to look at this deck. I always want to be moving those counters. I always want to be gaining life. I always want to be drawing cards for 3 mana. But I think we need to hedge our bets on as many of our strategies as possible. Leave a land with a couple counters on it, so that way you never know. You could be late in the game, and after a board wipe, nobody has creatures, and somebody's low on life, and you may be able to just straight up reanimate that land and hit for some damage or fulfill a trigger that you need to fulfill by just animating that land. And I think that's why it's important. But I've said before, and I'll say it again, no deck's ever complete. This is my version 1.0 shot at Black Panther, and I think there's a lot of things I'd learn in testing, which is, am I making enough tokens? Am I caring about the counters enough? And do I need to worry about gaining life more? The card on the left, I think, deserves a spot in the deck. The reason it's not in the deck is because of its real-life cost. Archangel of Thune is a $40 card. I think it's very well worth the $40 for what it does, but I'm also not playing a ton of ways to automatically search it out, right? So it can feel kind of bad when you want to play a $40 card, but you have no way to find it. Archangel of Thune says whenever you gain life, you put a counter on each creature you control. So remember, Black Panther's gaining you life when you're moving the counters, even just one, meaning that there's a lot of potential to gain life in this deck, and I think Thune could be very good at that. But again, expensive card. It comes with a great stat line. It's a 3/4 that has lifelink, so it's going to start gaining you life in combat and really paying you back for the investment you're putting into it. But I can understand why a lot of people wouldn't want to pay $40 for one creature. And I think at the end of the day, I have to remember that people are watching this video that maybe Marvel is their reason to want to play Magic. And I think some people want to know that, that explanation. Awaken the Woods is a sorcery. Again, the only reason I did not put the sorcery in the deck is because of its real life cost. It's about a $16 sorcery at the moment. But it says that you create X 1/1 green forest dryad land creature tokens. This is really nice because then all of those tokens are lands, meaning that Black Panther's abilities can put counters on them. They also can tap for mana, so you kind of get the best of both worlds on that. But again, I wanted to try to put as much of the money as I could for our budget well into the cards. I think at the end of the day, something like Innkeeper's Talent might be, to me, a win more card over Awaken the Woods. But I think both are really good cards and both really do their job. It's just tough, right? It's tough at the end of the day to know what to put in and what not. But I think that's the beauty of a deck never being done, is that once we finish our list, we get to go test it. And maybe you realize in your testing that Awaken the Woods is way better than a spell that I've mentioned before. Put it in the deck. But sometimes you kind of need to see it. You need to understand it. And then Halo Fountain is a great alternate win con for the deck. So for a white and tap it, you can untap a tap creature you control to make another counter or another token. This is great because another Black Panther trigger. 2 white mana into it and untap 2 creatures to draw a card. Okay, there's some cards, all right. Help us draw some cards. We're going to be tapping our tokens to attack or do other things, or maybe mana, right? Because of our cards that give them the ability to tap for mana. And then 5 white, tap it, untap 15 tap creatures you control, you win the game. So here's another way to potentially win the game on just having tokens. Again, love Halo Fountain. The issue here wasn't the cost, it was just the spot. Between trying to make sure we paid off all of the ways I think Black Panther can be good, I just couldn't find the spot for Halo Fountain. But I think of these 3 cards, this and Awaken the Woods are probably the 2 that I'm looking to bring in first, because I think both of them have huge upside. I love Thune. Thune's a great card, but again, I would really have to justify to myself the $40 price tag, because I think there's a lot of other ways to be good in the deck. For half the cost, you could play something like Cathar's Crusade, which whenever a creature comes in, puts a counter on all your creatures. And to me, it's strictly better than Thune in the sense that it's an enchantment, which is harder to remove. And I'm going to put a lot more creatures in than I'm going to gain life. So you can kind of see the difference, right, in that ability stuck between 2 different things. Well, let's get into our playtest. Let's have some fun. Let's see what we can do with the deck. Keeping a 4-lander, we got Mishra's Factory, so there's a way to get, right, counters on our creatures. Inspiring Leader, Pest Infestation, and Jaheira. So we've got a nice bed here, right? We've got a land we can put some counters on. We've got a way to make tokens, way to buff tokens, way to make our tokens tap for mana. I like this. I think this is a good start. Nothing I want to do on turn 1, so I think it makes sense to get down a tap land. So we could put Black Panther down on turn 2 if we want to. I'm going to pick Lush Portico instead of the Restless Prairie just because we get this Surveil. So we get the option of either putting it back on top or in our graveyard. I like March of the Multitudes. That's going to make us some tokens later. So I think I'll happily keep it on top. And I think turn 2, I'd rather just get Black Panther down. Remember, it is a 2/2 with First Strike. So it's a card that can definitely start becoming a threat, right? If our opponents don't deal with it, or, it can be a great blocker for us. I'll put the counter on the Lush Portico because remember that Black Panther does do it when it comes in. I want to get that factory down, right, so that I can start putting counters on it as another threat. But I think for now, we'll just do that. So turn 3, I can get a land down and play a 3-drop. I like something like Jaheira, right? I do actually like something like Inspiring Leader as well. Or we could do something like Cultivate to continue to get some more lands in and get some mana for next turn. This is one of those scenarios where you kind of have to decide what you think is more important at the time. If people are getting kind of slow starts, I think I'm going to slam this Cultivate, do some ramp, and just keep myself going. Because this could give me 5 mana next turn, which could push me into like a Pest Infestation if people have played their Soul Rings or their Mana Rocks. I could do X for 2 next turn for Pest Infestation, get rid of 2 artifacts or enchantments, make 4 pests. That's 4 Black Panther triggers. That's 4 counters. And that's a good, right? That's a beautiful turn 4 play in the sense that I'm making tokens and I'm getting those counters on. Then all those pests could eventually tap for March of the Multitudes, giving me more counters. So I think to me, the Cultivate seems like the play I like the most. But if I'm really worried about my opponents being too fast or if they're too slow, maybe I want to get cheeky and do something else. But to me, I think I like this play the best because it's just going to allow us to get more mana on board and propel ourselves forward, which is the one thing that green can be so good at. Now, remember about Pest Infestation is you don't have to target any artifacts or enchantments with this. I can just straight up cast this for 5 right now, make 2 pests, and I don't have to destroy a single artifact or enchantment. And I think that's important to remember because a lot of people are going to assume that I have to make 2 targets, and I don't. It says up to X. So I can do that for 5, make 2 of them, so 2 in each X. Remember that each X has to be the same. Twice X tokens. Now I have 4 right Black Panther triggers, and I'm gonna put them all on that Inkmoth on that Mishra's Factory. I want Mishra's Factory now as an option to have if I want to attack with. Now next turn, I don't mind even moving those counters if I don't have any other mana to use, but I like the idea of turning Mishra's Factory into this threat that my opponents now have to deal with. Nice part about these pests or whenever they die, we gain a life, so now they can kind of help pad our life total a little bit if need be. We'll come into turn 5. Love the idea of turning those pests into be able to tap for mana. That's not bad. I can also convoke them with March of the Multitudes, so it's not like I need to play Jaheira for them to do that. I think there's 2 ways to think about this turn. We have Restless Prairie, which is another creature that can land and turn into a creature. We'll get that in. I was thinking about putting in a tap land, but let's do this. If I play Inspiring Leader, that would be 7 mana into the March of Multitudes, which would be 4 tokens. Or I play a tap land, don't play the Inspiring Leader, and now I have 9, which would be 6 into March of the Multitudes, which is kind of what I'd like to do, because then Inspiring Leader would turn all of them into 3/3s. My thought was, do I play Jaheira or Inspiring Leader this turn and have a little less mana for this March of the Multitudes? Or do I save it, don't attack this turn? Remember that I can do Black Panther's ability at instant speed, so I could even do that, right? I could even, instead of doing Inspiring Leader plus March of the Multitudes, I could also do Black Panther's ability plus March of the Multitudes and move the counters, gain some life, draw a card, and still, like I said, have 3 tokens. So I think it might make more sense to put the untapped land in and do that. I think I want to soup up Black Panther here a little bit, because remember, when all those tokens come in, I can put the counters back on Mishra's Factory. So here's my idea. On my opponent's turn, we can move all the counters to Black Panther. That's going to gain us 4 life and draw us a card. And then, it says 3 mana, I've got that. So then, on my opponent's turn before mine, I'm going to tap these 3 and tap these 4. I should have enough white, pretty much no matter how I... And I remember I can always tap Black Panther to do it as well. To convoke, to make 4 of those 1/1 soldiers with lifelink. That's 4 more Black Panther triggers. We'll put them all back on Mishra's Factory, so it's still that thread. And now coming up to my turn, right? I have 8 tokens. I can play that Inspiring Leader, turn them all into 3/3s. We have Gavining Township, which can tap to put counters on all of our creatures, growing all of our creatures, right? But I like Inspiring Leader because now all these are 3/3s. Now we have 8 3/3s. 24 damage on the board. 4 of them have lifelink, so that's a lot of life we can get back. We could put Scepter of Celebration down if we want to. We could tap the I kind of like the idea of Jaheira, so that way these can tap for mana. Get the Scepter down. 3 for that, 3 for yeah. Tap the Scepter. I could tap enough to give this to Black Panther. Tap these 3 with Jaheira to put the Black Panther into the Scepter. So now it's an 8-10 with 10-8 with Trample. And it's going to make me a bunch of citizens. And I think you can kind of see now we've got a good board state. We might be weak to a board wipe here, but the nice part is on this attack, if the board wipe happens after I deal damage to get the citizens, I put more of the counters on Mishra's Factory. Now it's still a threat, right? And I think all we need is to get some more tokens on the board, which the Scepter is going to help us do. And I think we're just going to slowly take over this specific game as long as no one can deal with the board. But let's get into playtest number 2. Stirring Weirwood is a land that can animate, Command Tower, and then Mishra's Factory, another land to animate. So a 3-land hand, 2 of them can animate. Jaheira, Bess, Battle Priest, and Elspeth. So good mix here of different things we can do. Play the Wildwood in first since it comes in tapped, and I don't really have any other good plans on turn 1, so there's no reason to do that. Turn 2, I don't think there's anything I can do other than make a knight with Virtual Loyalty, so I'll go on to adventure on probably my opponent's turn and make that knight. Just so we have a creature on board, and we're getting started somewhere. I want to make sure that we have a good amount on board. The reason I'm doing that is because then if I played Jaheira, I could tap it for mana if I wanted to. Turn 3, we get Druid's Call. So whenever the enchanted creature, we put it on a creature. Whenever that creature's dealt damage, it makes squirrel tokens. I kind of like this for Black Panther once we get it souped a little up, right? Or any other creature we have. Once we get it kind of souped up a little bit, right? Now it can start making tokens when it's getting dealt damage, and we're probably going to want to be attacking with it anyway. Bess could make a ton of sense here, especially when we're working our way up to Elspeth. I think Jaheira makes an equal amount of sense this turn. Black Panther might make sense this turn, right? Start putting counters on that Stirring Wildwood. I just feel like we're going to end up, we're going to end up leaving mana on the table either way. If we play Black Panther, we're probably going to leave a mana off the table. If we play one of these, then we used all of our mana. But I think either way, we're just setting up this turn. So I think I'm going to play the Black Panther. We'll put the counter on the Wildwood. So if we want to turn it into a elemental with reach, we can. We can attack with the token if we want to. On turn 3, we might have a relevant attack, but I'm not as worried about that right now. We'll get this Mishra's Factory down. So now 4 mana. Just trying to think. I could technically go Jaheira right into Druid's Call. Right, that would be 4 mana plus the 1 from the token, right, with Jaheira. I could also play the Battle Priest and set up more counters for later. I could, play the Bess this turn, but I think it makes sense to do Jaheira plus Druid's Call. Jaheira will put the counter when it comes in. We'll put the counter on Mishra's Factory. Now, if I have a good attack, especially where someone can chump me and maybe just do 1 damage. I think I'd do that to get the squirrel. There's probably no way for me to know that on a playtest like this, so we're going to say that we don't. But I think there's a nice world where we could, if someone just had a 1/1 attack with Black Panther, maybe they block and give us that squirrel, right, and give us that extra trigger. But okay, we'll say that they don't for the purposes of this because there's no way to know for sure. But it would present an option on that turn if, let's say, your opponents did have something like that. Okay, well, we top deck a Secure the Waste, which is great. The only nice part, I guess, in this scenario is we have to decide whether we want to make these tokens at instant speed with that Secure the Waste, or we want to do it at sorcery speed with Season of the Burrow. Because Season of the Burrow can make us 5 rabbits right now. It can also remove something, whereas Secure the Waste can only make us 4 soldiers, and it's going to do it at instant speed. There's a couple ways we can look at this. I mean, at the end of the day, none of my creatures have counters yet, so it's not like Battle Priest is the obvious option. I would love a world where I can get Bess down first, right, to start growing Bess for the purposes of that. But I think either of these two are my play. I think that at least to me seems obvious. And the nice part is I could use those tokens to tap for Black Panther's ability on a future turn, right, to get mana. So I think what I would do is if I have an attack with Black Panther, I'm going to take it. Even if it's a chump block where I can get a squirrel out of it, I probably would. I mean, my opponents have no idea what I have, so maybe they don't block if they see a 2/2 coming at them with a bunch of mana up. But then what I would probably look to do is just secure the waste for 4 here. Warriors, that's right. On my opponent's turn before mine, what that's going to do is I would probably just put 2 counters here. Well, I might as well put all of them here, just so when I move them with Black Panther next turn, they can get me really good. Come back to our turn. So, I mean, I probably would attack with, like I said, attack with Black Panther there if I can, but otherwise, I'm just going to look to secure the waste for 4, get a bunch of counters on Mishra's Factory, because what I want to do is tap to move all of these counters to Black Panther. And the reason is because now I feel like I can really take advantage of this Druid's Call by attacking, and if they try to chump block me, I can get some squirrels out of it. That was just 3 mana, and I could tap these for it, so I've still got 5 mana left. Burrow's a great option. Battle Priest is a great option to give Black Panther lifelink now, but I think that makes sense to most of me is playing this Virtual Loyalty, because now all of these will untap at the end of my turn, so I've got 2 mana left if I wanted to do something with it. I don't see an option for it right now, but it could be an option, right? But now what I like is we're going to go to combat. Let's say somebody chumps, let's say somebody chumps the Black Panther with a 1/1. Well, that wouldn't happen with the first strike now that I think about it. So it'd have to be a big enough creature. Let's say for the purpose of this that it doesn't. But now we would go to end step. All of these creatures untap and get a counter. So now I'm growing my board, right, with that Virtual Loyalty. And now, now Battle Priest seems like a great play. I think from here, there's a lot of options. Pretty much no matter what we draw, Elspeth can come down this next turn because of all these tapping for mana and make us a bunch more tokens. I think there's a lot of ways we can move forward. Season of the Burrow I've always really liked because you can just make the rabbits, or you can get rid of a non-land permanent. You give its controller a card, but hey, that's okay because you're getting rid of something important. I think this is a good kind of place for our playtest to stop because we've made a nice board state, and we've got that nice tree of options now to move on with. Let me know, what do you think of Black Panther down in the comment section below. I will say for everybody watching, this is probably my favorite of the 5 that I brewed this week. I thought the deck was a ton of fun. I love the idea of really getting different decision trees based on how you want to run the deck and what situations you're in. And I find that really fun. I don't think this is going to be the flashiest of the 5 decks by any means, but it's been a ton of fun to brew. I hope you enjoy it, and I will catch you guys next time.